And it's no surprise to those of us who know her that while holding the prestigious position of the 79th chaplain to the Speaker of the House of Commons, as you heard, Mr. Speaker, in tribute to you, a well-deserved appointment, and one of the 3 chaplains to Her Majesty the Queen, she is much loved by her congregation at Holy Trinity Church, Dalston, and All Saints Church, Haggerston, where she has worked for over 16 and a half years. And if you ask her, I'm sure she will say that her pastoral mission, both here and in Hackney, share a common thread, and that is to make sure that everyone is well spiritually and everyone feels good enough to do their jobs well. And the Leader of the House was right when she says prayers every day. Often I feel as though I've never heard those prayers before. She has an amazing way of making you feel that's the first time you've ever heard those important words. And she will tell you that prayer is at the heart of what she does. Reverend Rose has always been a visible presence and is often seen around Parliament, as she says, loitering with intent, comfortable in her own skin and in her hair. And I know that she has sought out honourable members when they've faced difficulties. We haven't had to go to her. She comes to us and she makes sure that she counsels us in the appropriate way. But what Rose was always been keen to emphasise is that in all she does, she feels connected, rooted to her past in Jamaica, her grandparents and their grandparents, with sacrifices, ideas and hope, passed through stories flowing from one generation to the next, that such a foundation will be an integral part of success for the next generation of young black people growing up in the UK, on the basis that they survived, so we must thrive. Yes, she has a way with words. And true happiness, she maintains, flows from where you come from, where you are rooted, and the depth of spirit that tells you who you are. And she poses questions. Why should women be seen and not heard? Why not live in this world and not in the past? Why shouldn't women be in leadership? Why should people of colour not be seen in all walks of life? But a good leader, she says, acts with integrity and loves the people whom they serve. And we certainly have felt the warmth of Reverend Rose Hudson-Wilkins' spiritual leadership while she's been in Parliament at a very exacting period of our history. In an interview to The Observer, she revealed that her secret prayer was that she would like to see a more civil attitude amongst MPs. She warned that the world was looking in, and she would like to see a change in the way we MPs handled listening and speaking to each other. I think it's a work in progress. And maybe when she's looking back on us from Dover, she will see that we have achieved her aims. Because I've seen her sitting through many debates, particularly during the European debates. Rose, we shall miss having you with us, guiding us gently, but with Labi Sifri's words, something inside so strong, to learn to deal with our individual experiences by the way in which we respond to them. And in the case of us women, teaching us to respond to high barriers by becoming taller. We wish you, your Ken, your 2 daughters and son, all the very best in your new role. We know that you will continue as Bishop of Dover with your own mantra, to achieve, to excel, to overcome obstacles, that no limitations will rule your efforts, and that we have already witnessed. We know you will go on to greater things, and are proud to have crossed paths with you. A true pilgrim's progress, from Jamaica to Canterbury. As Aretha Franklin would say, respect. Reverend Rose, we thank you. You were there for us when we needed you most.
I must thank the Shadow Leader, and I think I speak for the House in doing so, for the sheer warmth and magnificence of that tribute. I think that there is an electricity in the chamber as a result of what the Honourable Lady has said and the unadulterated passion with which she has delivered it, and I want to thank her. Sir Peter Bottomley.
Mr. Speaker, as Parliamentary Warden of St Margaret's Church, Parliament Square, can I join in supporting the motion by my right honourable friend? The only point that surprised me about his speech is that he didn't mention, the motion does, but he didn't mention the fact she will be the Bishop in Canterbury, where my right honourable friend married his wife with a number of people presiding, and he managed to incorporate in this presently Anglican cathedral a Roman Catholic Mass. So I think it's almost coming home time for him. Can I say how much I welcomed the words of the Right Honourable Lady for Walsall? I want to say that in watching Rose Hudson-Wilkin work with John Hall as Dean of Westminster, with Andrew Tremlett and with Jane Sinclair, who have been the rectors at St Margaret's, and in her sharing of the monthly parliamentary communion and the breakfast in your house, Mr Speaker, that we have seen closely in private what she is also well known for in public. I add that it was a delight to meet her grandchildren in the reception in your house, Mr Speaker. They're a tribute, I think, to a modern generation in this country. And if some of them come here, not perhaps as Speaker's chaplain, but as members of Parliament, it'd be a delight, especially if I can remain here to join them, welcome them. I want to end with some words that will be familiar to Rose Hudson-Wilkin. Our vision is for everyone, everywhere, to encounter God's love, to be empowered to transform their communities through faith shared in words and action. She says she comes from Montego Bay. I say she comes from the Church Army. Those are the Church Army's dedication. I thank her for her dedication to us.
Yeah, bless you. I'm deeply obliged to the honourable gentleman for what he has said. Mr Patrick Grady.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Hopefully you won't mind if I start very briefly by expressing my own thanks to you for your service in the chair and wishing you all the very best for the future. You've been a source of encouragement and sound advice to many of us in the Scottish National Party, and I've been particularly grateful for your support in my role as Chief Whip. Of course, for Scottish National Party members, staying at Westminster is not a long-term ambition, but the role that you've played and the reforms that you've introduced has certainly made our time here more tolerable. And as others have said, one of your most significant legacies and early decisions is the appointment of Reverend Rose Hudson-Wilkin as your chaplain. And I remember as a younger, keener but casual observer of business in this place, reading some of the coverage and criticisms of that appointment at that time. But as you have previously said, Mr Speaker, those critics were wrong in every single respect. And from the very start, SNP members here have found that Rose brings a presence of welcome, of comfort and of reassurance. And there are some who would question the value or relevance of starting the day, the parliamentary day, with prayers. But of course participation is voluntary, and as the Leader of the House alluded to, I don't think that there's anyone, believer or non-believer, who has had the privilege of experiencing the prayers led by the Reverend Rose Hudson-Wilkin, who could doubt their value. No matter how tense the day may be, no matter how important or portentous the business to come, her tone and eloquence at the start of each day have a levelling effect, and they remind us all that ultimately we are all equal. For believers, we are equal in the sight of God. And prayers, especially in recent times, have provided some memorable moments, even if they've not always been visible to the public. Her choice of texts often matches with an uncanny ability the occasion of the day and hits the right note. On the start of our sitting, on the historic Saturday sitting a couple of weeks ago, she began with St Paul, "Do not let yourselves be anxious." And that was the moment that broke the ice, and chuckling could be heard across the chamber. And by leading those prayers, Rose has ministered to the House collectively, and her presence in the undergallery, literally praying for us as we've taken part in some of the biggest and most historic votes of recent years, has not gone unnoticed. And she has also ministered to many members individually as a chaplain and especially at times when tragedy has struck Parliament and the House. And she has built strong ecumenical relations, forging in particular a firm bond with Canon Pat Brown. And he may officially be titled, Mr Speaker, the Roman Catholic duty priest to the Houses of Parliament, but to the Catholic community in Westminster and to many others, I believe, he too is undoubtedly a chaplain, and EDM 71 congratulates him on his 10 years of service. And he invited Rose to address us at Mass in the crypt yesterday as the chapel of her chaplaincy, after all. And her reflection was once again on that admonition not to be anxious, but to trust in God. And we hope that's what she'll do as she takes on the role of Bishop of Dover. Once again, she's breaking down barriers and conventions, as she has done here in Westminster, and as you have done, Mr Speaker, in appointing her. And we warmly welcome in due course Canon Tricia Hallis. She brings considerable experience in promoting diversity, inclusion and ecumenism, all of which means we can have every confidence in her as a worthy successor to Rose. Rose said to us last night that although she was leaving this place, she would carry us in her heart and in her prayers. She can be assured that we will do the same for her in ours. This morning at prayers, she invoked the priestly blessing from the Book of Numbers on us. The Lord bless you and keep you and make his face shine upon you. And I think perhaps in return we could invoke the old Irish blessing. May the road rise up to meet you. May the wind be always at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face and the rains fall soft upon your fields. And until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of his hand.
Well, I thank the Honourable Gentleman for what he said. We'll come to colleagues. I hope that observers of our proceedings understand the enormous affection and esteem in which we all hold Rose. I just want to mention that I have a constituent and a former constituent in the gallery, Julie Kincaid, my constituent, and Sue Polhill, former councillor Sue Polhill, until relatively recently a constituent of mine in the gallery. And in this session, I hope they're seeing the House at its best. And I want also, because I think it is apposite, and there is a piquancy about it, to mention that the Church of England's diversity advisor, who has helped deliver real beneficial and progressive change, Elizabeth Henry, is with us as well. Elizabeth, you have been the most enormous asset to the Church, but if I may also publicly thank you. You've been a great support in relation to Rose. You were an early champion of hers, knowing her quality, and you greatly assisted my colleagues and me only the other day in the recruitment of Rose's successor. So I want to salute the work you do and the passion you show and the experience you bring and the counsel that you offer. They are very precious. Which side did we come from? It's this side now. Yes, indeed. Yes, Sir Roger Gale.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, I've always thought that the job of the Speaker's chaplain is rather like the person known as the Bish on one of Her Majesty's warships, and that person who sort of prowls the lower decks, surrounded by heathens and heretics, waiting for somebody to call upon them. And I guess this place, particularly in the last few months, has been just a little bit like that. But the wonderful thing about Rose is she's always been there to be called on when she's needed. And through some very stressful times for everybody on both sides of this House, she's been, I think, a tower of strength. Mr Speaker, you guys and girls have come to say goodbye to Rose. I've come to say hello. Because, as my right honourable friend said, the Bishop of Dover is the Bishop in Canterbury. And just as an aside, earlier in questions to the Church Commissioner, it was asked, how does the Archbishop of Canterbury manage when he has so much to do, not only at home but overseas? And the answer, of course, is he's got the Bishop in Canterbury, and that will be Rose. And I know that she will be a tower of strength to Archbishop Justin, as she has been to this place as well. But she's coming to East Kent. And I have warned the lady who is going to become Bishop Rose that one of her first duties will be to visit the wonderful constituency of North Thanet and to spend a happy couple of hours on Margate seafront. In January, when the rain and the wind and the snow will almost certainly be horizontal, because we celebrate in Margate the blessing of the seas. And that's the occasion, the Feast of the Epiphany, when we throw a small Greek Cypriot boy into the freezing waters of the North Sea. And so far without success, we tried to drown him. But the Bishop in Dover, the Bishop of Canterbury, plays a key role in that event. Rose, we are looking forward enormously to welcoming you to East Kent.
That speech was typical of the honourable gentleman. Thank you. Mr. Gavin Robinson.
I'm very grateful for getting the opportunity to participate in this tribute and regret that I wasn't in my place to take part in the tributes to you, sir. I should say I wasn't here earlier for your tributes because I was an adherent of the rule that you set down, that you can't just beetle into the chamber after the start. Now, I realise that you weren't maybe as strictly adhering to that rule today as on other occasions. But had I have been here from the start, or had I have had the opportunity to participate, one of the things that you have done, for which I would like to associate myself in every way, is the steadfast support that you have given to Rose. I have heard you not only before I joined this House, but subsequently on a number of occasions, stand steadfastly and resolutely against racism associated with her as an individual, steadfastly and resolutely against gender bias or gender discrimination. And what you have exuded in your appointment as Speaker's chaplain in Rose is what I hope we as a House embody. I have never heard a member of this House, maybe they did previously, criticise Rose. I think she is wonderful. She exudes a faith that I don't talk about often, but that I hold personally and privately. It was mentioned by the shadow leader of the House, who is, again, a wonderful lady, that Rose isn't here, and she's sorry that she's not here. I think it embodies her character. Rose was here during your tributes as a steadfast support for you, but she is much too humble, exudes the Christian strength we all should embody, to be here herself for this. I have been here 4 years, as you know, sir. On occasions, I have gone to Rose and tapped her on the shoulder and shared with her the difficulties that some of my colleagues have faced. And I know without asking, she has been to see them. She has provided strength. She has provided assurance, and she has provided the love that she exudes on our God's behalf. The leader of the House mentioned the comfort that we get from liturgy. And there is huge comfort from liturgy, but depending on who gives it, it can often appear repetitive. And yet that has never been the case during prayers in this House. I remember the Honourable Member for Cheltenham, who's not in this place, talking about her beautiful intonation. The poetry that she injected into Scripture brought it alive for us. As somebody from Ulster Protestantism knows how important Sunday morning is, I didn't think I would skip into those Anglican ways of believing, sir, that coming into this chamber for prayers was important. Not only was it important, it's provided huge comfort for me. And not every day, but on the days when we are facing difficulties collectively, on days whenever nationally we know politics are in a bad place, a huge source of strength in just coming here for those 3 or 4 minutes and hearing the word expounded in such a beautiful way. Mr. Speaker, I have never spoken publicly before, and I probably won't again, about the difficulties that my wife faced when my son was born. And those difficulties meant that public baptism at the front of church was not an option. And 2 years after he was born, Rose baptised him here, very privately, very personally. And as a 2-year-old, you can imagine when the light of life was past, he blew it out. When solemn prayers were being shared, he was trying to run around. And Rose just put her arm around him and held him there during all of those precious moments. And she has been precious to me and to my wife. And I know she's been precious to many in this house. And so for my part, can I thank you for allowing me to speak so early? Can I thank you for giving me the opportunity to participate in this debate, and thank Rose from the bottom of our hearts.
Thank you. Sir David Liddington.
Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted to be able to associate myself with and wholeheartedly support the motion moved by my right honourable friend, the Leader of the House. I just want to say two things about my own memories of Rose. The first is over those few minutes at the beginning of our parliamentary days when the Speaker's chaplain reads a psalm and leads us in a brief session of prayers. What I know I will always remember is in part the sheer musicality of Rose Hudson Wilkins' voice, which gave extra resonance and meaning to the texts in which she was leading us. But I remember too her willingness to vary the normal order of prayers when the occasion made that right. There have been times, I remember this from when I was Leader of the House myself, in the immediate aftermath of the terrorist attack on Westminster Bridge and on the Palace of Westminster, when the sense of shock in this chamber at the beginning of the day has been palpable. And somehow on those occasions, Rose knew which psalm, which passage, which prayer to introduce in place of one of our usual prayers to reflect that mood in the House and to respond to the particular occasion. The second point I want to make, Mr. Speaker, is about her pastoral care, and the honourable gentleman, the right honourable gentleman, the member for Belfast East, has spoken of his own and his family's experiences. Again, when I was leader, one of the things that is etched in my memory is how in the months, indeed years, that followed the dreadful murder of our colleague Jo Cox, members on all sides, and particularly, though not exclusively women, members of the House, began to open up about the abuse and the threats under which they had been suffering for quite some time. Whether it was about those things, or whether it was dealing with a member at a time of personal or family crisis or tragedy, Rose was always there, quiet, listening, offering comfort, offering solidarity when it was most needed. And she was willing also in her time here, in years when the reputation of this House and of its members collectively has been under fierce and sometimes vicious attack, to speak up in public to affirm the value of the political vocation and to assert that from her experience she knew that most members here, regardless of which political tradition they represented, had come into politics with a noble motive of trying to make things better for the people that they serve. Rose is now going on to greater things within the church, and I'm sure that the people of Margate and the rest of North Kent will soon discover that they will have a shepherd in Rose Hudson Wilkin of great talent and unparalleled pastoral commitment. Those of us in this House now, whether we are hoping to stay or whether we are intending to leave,
will always remember Rose with affection, with pride, and with a sense of love, because love was what she brought to this place and what she always sought to embody.
Thank you. Mr. Stephen Pound.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate that you, sir, are occasionally someone who believes in constructive iconoclasm. And I think this is a sort of occasion when I say to myself, would it not be wonderful if just for once we could not sit as Robespierre demanded we sit in the Revolutionary Council on the left and the right, but we all sat on one side or the other, and we sat here together, because we today are not divided. We're not divided by politics, we're not divided by theology, we're not divided by religion. We're divided in no way. We are united by an extraordinary admiration for a truly remarkable woman. And I think we've heard some extraordinary contributions, Mr. Speaker. When I think everyone who's spoken related to Rose Hudson Wilkins in their own particular, their own personal way. And I think that is so typical of the henotic qualities of the woman, that she appealed to every one of us from our different traditions in so many different ways. And some of the tributes that have been paid today have been emotional. Some of them have been stirring. Some of them have been hard to listen to. But in many ways, that was Rose's ministry here in this place. Sometimes she went when the words were difficult to say. When my mother died, she was an extraordinary source of comfort to me. And I think every one of us has had a similar story to tell. I think the Honourable Gentleman for Glasgow North, however, I think he was slightly censoring his comments when he gave that famous Irish blessing of the wind always being your back and the road always rising up to meet you. I mentioned my late mother, God rest her soul. I seem to remember the last two lines of that blessing are, "And may you be in heaven for half an hour before the devil knows you're dead." I can't imagine why my late mother Dominica felt it appropriate for me to learn that couplet, but she certainly did, and in the manner of education back in those days, she made me repeat it on a regular basis. Mr. Speaker, one thing that's slightly odd is we've heard Rose described as the Reverend Prebendary Rose Hudson Wilkins. Some of us see her as she ascends to the episcopal purple. We almost call her, the about-to-be bishop. But whatever we call her, Mr. Speaker, a rose is just as sweet by any name. And what we have here is our Rose. Be she bishop, be she prebendary, be she canon, be she whatever. She's our Rose Hudson Wilkins. And she's remarkable for that. The horror of the murder of Keith Palmer was mentioned earlier on. Many of us were in the House on that occasion. Many of us remember that she and Canon Pat Brown organised 3 different services on that very day, so that everyone could have the opportunity to make their peace with God and to actually find comfort and succour on that particular day. It was a truly, truly remarkable occasion. She rose to that occasion. Mr. Speaker, I think you rose to that occasion. I think the House rose to that occasion. And it's a tragedy that it took that appalling, cold-blooded murder of such a good man for us to come together, as it did in the memory of Joe Cox later on. We've had some terrible times in Parliament in the last decade, but we also had some great times. And the terrible times have been mitigated by the love and the warmth and the illumination and the prayer of Rose Hudson Wilkins. Last night, as the Honourable Gentleman, my friend from Glasgow North said, she concelebrated the Holy Mass in the chapel underneath. And the reading was from Romans, and the wonderful lines in that about don't worry too much about praying, because if you can't find the words, God will give you the words. God will always find the words for your prayer. You don't need to worry about getting the words right. You don't even need to worry about getting them in the right order. You don't even need to worry about your vocabulary or your enunciation. God will give you the words. Rose Hudson Wilkins always had the words. She always knew what to say, be it a short contribution or a long contribution. She knew what to say. It's been mentioned earlier on that she's not in her usual place in the undergallery there, where she sat there many a time, and I saw her shaking her head slightly, almost imperceptibly, but sending us the messages, oh dear, oh dear, what are you doing now? And praying for us. I think she's without at the present time, but close. And I like to think she'll always be close to this place. The Bishop of London, the former Bishop of London, past Bishop of London, bar one, the Right Reverend and Right Honourable Richard Charteris and I were at school together. And we have an arrangement that he doesn't say anything about what I got up to, and I reciprocate. We took different theological paths, but when it came time to appoint the next Bishop of London, I felt it appropriate to write to him, to say that I make no suggestion as to who the next bishop should be, but she should be a woman of colour, she should be a woman, her initials should be RHW, and if possible she should come from Montego Bay. And if you can find anyone who actually fits that criteria and that category, I'm sure she would make an excellent Bishop of London. Now, an excellent choice was made, and I'm glad to say that Rose has found her bishopric down on the south coast, though I have to say, the Honourable Gentleman from Thanet, when he talked about hurling young boys into the foaming brine for some extraordinary marine sacrifice, I think maybe a little bit of exorcism might be appropriate on those particular places. But had she been appointed to Bishop of London, then she would not only have broken another ceiling, she would have broken a stained glass ceiling. And that's what Rose has done, and she would have achieved so much by doing that. I find her calmness, her generosity, her warmth, and her love remarkable and characteristics that I draw strength from. But let us also not forget her intellect. She had a formidable intellect. She was a great Bible scholar and a great student of theology. And the discussions we had, maybe from slightly different theological perspectives, but the number of things I learnt from Rose, because Rose is one of those people, you know, who believes intelligence is like a fire to be lit and a brain isn't like a bucket to be filled. She actually wanted to draw you out and discuss these matters with you. She was a truly, truly remarkable woman. I feel the need to actually head down to Dover just to keep in contact with her. But whether I corporeally transport myself down to Dover or not, all I know is that her prayers will be enveloping this building and this place, because she is part of our history and part of our own culture that we have here, and we are the better for it. Mr. Speaker, this morning, during the tributes quite rightly paid to yourself, one thing that we couldn't do was to actually give any credit to your successor, because frankly we don't know who your successor is. Bookmakers appear to know, but I mean that's entirely inappropriate to mention. However, in the case of Rose, we can mention my good friend Tricia Hillis. And may I, on behalf of all the community and the congregation of St Barnabas Northolt, say what an excellent choice you have made, Mr. Speaker. Tricia Hillis, despite an unfortunate predilection for Watford Football Club, I rather suspect she was attracted to Vicarage Road for theological reasons rather than the lure of Troy Deeney. But I have to say that when we come to meet Tricia Hillis, Mr. Speaker, I must warn you, there will be dancing, there will be singing, there will be music, because Tricia Hillis can never stand still in one place from 1 minute to the next. And although we've talked about our different theological traditions, and I tend to be with Monsignor Ronnie Knox, the late Monsignor Knox, who felt that by and large enthusiasm was not a good thing and should be, and we have a little bit too much of it. But Tricia Hillis is an enthusiast, and she is a marvellous, marvellous pastor, and she will bring so much energy, so much courage, and so much colour, and so much excitement to this place. I have to say, to warn members, now, I, of course, am backing away from the stage, away from the limelight, returning to well-merited obscurity. No. Were it put to a vote, I think I would have left years ago. But as yeah. I think, Mr. Speaker, there is precedence for a seating vote or standing. I forget which one which, but let's not chance fate. Look, when the new House assembles, and I wish everybody who is standing every success and happiness in that, when they meet Tricia Hillis, I want them to know two things. Firstly, she is a woman of God. Absolutely to the marrow of her bones. She is a woman who will actually bring God's blessings to this place. And the second thing is, it's almost impossible to imagine anyone following Rose Hudson Wilkins. But believe you me, Mr. Speaker, Tricia Hillis is going to come very, very close. We're here, I think, to mention Tricia for the future, but for the present and for the future in Dover, let's just remember for a moment how incredibly lucky every one of us has been to be touched by that extraordinary, joyous, joyful Christian woman, Rose Hudson Wilkins, the chaplain to the Speaker, a woman who has taught us all so very, very much indeed. Mr. Speaker, there was a time when I was the Mayor of Ealing, and I revived the old habit of appointing the mayoral chaplain, which had fallen into desuetude. And I appointed Father Pat Foley, my parish priest, and at the beginning of each council meeting, he would stand, look at all the councillors, look at them again, and then cast his eyes up to heaven and pray for the borough of Ealing. I have to say that Rose never ever stopped praying, not just for us poor parliamentarians, but for what we stand for our democracy, for our nation, for our community, and, I hope, for a better, a fairer, a safer world. Rose has been an exemplar. She is going to Dover, but she's going with our prayers. But let us, Mr. Speaker, ask her to take with her our thanks and our gratitude, our respect, and if you'll allow me, sir, our love.
Well said.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
As I've listened to the successive tributes, I've been looking at my page of notes of all the things that I wanted to say in order to show appreciation for everything that Rose has brought to this place during her years of service here. And I've been having to cross off one after another because the heartfelt speeches so far have really encapsulated everything. But as we know, Mr. Speaker, in politics, everything may already have been said, but the show isn't over until everyone has said it. And I wish to try to say something that hasn't been said explicitly from a slightly unusual perspective in this context. And what I mean is that most of the tributes that have been made so far have clearly come from people blessed with deep religious belief. Sadly, I am not such a person, having had my religious belief hold below the waterline when I read too much for someone at a young age of some of the things that had happened in British and European history in the first half of the 20th century. But if, as some people say, religion is irrational, then also agnosticism can be irrational too. What do I mean by that? I mean by the fact that somebody who does not have a particular religious belief is nevertheless hugely touched and impressed by those people who do, and particularly by those people who do and who put it into practice by praying on one's behalf. At the risk of slightly embarrassing him, and I suspect he's going to be next to be called, the Honourable Member for Strangford has a habit of sending little notes to colleagues on the eve of elections.
I know that the Honourable Member for Strangford would want to hear this because the Right Honourable Gentleman is... It's okay. The Right Honourable Gentleman is referring to him. I'm sure he'll want to hear it. Dr. Julian Lewis.
As I was in mid-sentence of saying, the Honourable Gentleman has a wonderful habit of sending little notes to colleagues at election time and at other times when he thinks they may need a little bit of encouragement, saying, without any sort of patronising air, but with an air of true Christian love, that he is praying for them and their welfare. And as someone who is not blessed with deep religious faith, I know how much I deeply appreciate that, and that is, I'm sure, one of the reasons why the Honourable Gentleman for Strangford, irrespective of politics, is loved and respected in all parts of this chamber. And Rose Hudson Wilkin falls into, from my perspective, exactly the same character. It must have been very daunting for her to descend into this pit of monstrous egos, but she carried it off tremendously. She has never talked down to us. She has never scolded us. She has gently guided us. She has given hints through the choice, as have been said, of appropriate prayers, through the choice of appropriate language, and through the putting forward of a philosophy of righteousness, encouragement and love, from which we all have benefited, whether we are religious and whether we have faith or whether we lack it. And for that, and for her kindness to all who work in this place, I, for one, thank her.
Thank you. Jim Shannon.
Mr. Speaker, it's a pleasure to follow the Honourable Gentleman for New Forest East. And yes, he's come through a hard time in relation to his health and his circumstances, and that's something, Mr. Speaker, that I was aware of, and I made it my business to make him very much in my prayers, as I do for many people in this House. Not everyone will know that because your prayers are private, but he does know that because I spoke to him. I'm also very pleased to follow the Honourable Member for Ealing North, Mr. Speaker, who made some very constructive contributions, as he always does in this House. I'm going to miss him as a friend in this House whenever he leaves. He's one of the first members I got to meet when I came in here, and I wish him well in whatever the future may hold. I know it'll be a good one for him as well. I've very much enjoyed my fellowship with him, and also the Honourable Gentleman will know that he also has had a hard time health-wise and has got out the other side of it. Again, I believe, due to the prayers of God's people. Amen. And I believe that in my heart. Amen. I wish to add my voices to the many that have been raised in tribute to the Speaker's chaplain, the Reverend Rose Hudson Wilkin. I've met with the Speaker's chaplain on many occasions, and I've always been inspired by the gentle, measured and thoughtful manner that she has approached both personal conversations as well as scheduled events. I don't think there's not one of us who could not say that a conversation with the Reverend Rose was a conversation you enjoyed and you felt uplifted afterwards. I know I always did, because I just always felt so encouraged by what you did. The scripture says in Proverbs 31, "Who can find a virtuous woman? Her value is greater than that of rubies." And I feel that this House has been very blessed and very encouraged to have been guided spiritually by the Reverend Rose Hudson Wilkin. And we can easily see the worth and the worthwhile things that have been accomplished in this place. Rose by name, Mr. Speaker, Rose by nature, and I think every one of us enjoy our time with her. In a Parliament that has seen frustration and tempers rising to unheard of levels in this place, with calls for calmness and compassion being repeatedly made, the Reverend Rose has had that gentle spirit, that calming influence, and has been a true, I believe, a true ambassador for the Lord Jesus. We've exhorted in the Word of God to speak the truth, but to do so in love, and she does that all the time. This, I believe, has been missing all too often in this chamber, but never ever in the actions of the Reverend Rose and what she did. Yeah. I'm a member of the Baptist Church, Mr. Speaker. Whenever I first come here, I was made aware that there was Holy Communion in St Margaret's Church across the way. Although I'm not an Anglican, I felt that I should, and I did want to be there. And from the very beginning, I was encouraged by the Holy Communion. And also, and I look around the chamber here, many members who I see here who we had that Holy Communion with and enjoyed that time of fellowship together. After and our daily prayers in this chamber, people ask me back home, Mr. Speaker, are we still having prayers and scripture in the chamber? And I tell them, yes, we are. And they're encouraged by that. Can I say, I'm encouraged every day I come into this chamber and I hear scripture and I hear prayer, which I think is so important. I can also say that I feel encouraged for the day ahead. And I said to Reverend Rose one time, Reverend Rose, I'd nearly like to have nearly Holy Communion at least once a week, if that's possible, instead of once a month, or maybe every day, because every day we have Holy Communion. I feel we've had a visit from the Lord himself, and again, that's so important, what she does. The Honourable Member for Belfast East referred to the empathy and the compassion that the Reverend Rose has shown him and his wife and his young child, and none of us, especially not me as his colleague and friend, but all of us in this chamber couldn't fail to be moved and indeed encouraged by what has happened. I take this opportunity to wish the Reverend Rose every success and God's richest blessing as she continues her ministry as the new Bishop of Dover, and exhort her to keep pressing toward the mark for the prize of the high calling of God in Christ Jesus. And may the words of St Patrick, we have our patron saint in Northern Ireland, be your battle cry as you move forward. And this is the battle cry from St Patrick in Northern Ireland. Christ with me, Christ before me, Christ behind me, Christ in me, Christ beneath me, Christ above me, Christ on my right, Christ on my left, Christ when I lie down, Christ when I sit down, Christ when I arise, Christ in the heart of every man who thinks of me, Christ in the mouth of everyone who speaks of me, Christ in every eye that sees me, Christ in every ear that hears me. Reverend Rose, Mr Speaker, thank you to her. God bless her and all that she does and will do for the future. And I know wherever she is, in Dover or wherever it may be, she will serve her Lord and Saviour, who we serve here.
Sir Desmond Swain.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's a privilege to follow the Honourable Member for Strangford. When the member for Ealing North spoke, he referred to the Holy Mass. What is the meaning of the word holy? Daily at prayers we invoke the fellowship of the Holy Ghost. I know the Honourable Members say Holy Spirit. I prefer to stick with the original words, the Holy Ghost. I have no idea how to define holy or holiness, and I'm satisfied that there is no satisfactory dictionary definition. But I know holiness when I've encountered it, and we have encountered it in the presence of the Reverend Rose Hudson Wilkin.
Oh, well said.
Bless you.
Well
Mr Robert Neal.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I just wanted briefly to add a personal note of thanks and tribute to the Reverend Rose Hudson Wilkin. Rose married Anne Louise, my wife, and I about 18 months ago. And she did that with great charm, great style and joyfulness and great Christianity, but also showed great care and sensitivity to us in preparing us for that wedding, but also to our families, and in particular Anne Louise's two children who had lost their previous father tragically. And the care that she showed there has always stuck with us. And since then, particularly in the last few months, when Anne Louise sadly has been unwell, the continuing support and prayers and kindness that Rose has shown to our family means more to us than words I can say in this chamber could ever adequately convey. I also want to say a quick word about her husband Ken, who's been a great support to her, and who I, as chairman of the Justice Committee, had the pleasure of meeting when he was working as a prison chaplain. He, too, has been a great servant of God and of the broader community, and a great witness to his faith, and it enables me also to say how valued the work of the prison chaplaincy service is by many in difficult times of their lives. But to conclude, Mr. Speaker, Anne Louise specifically asked me to come here today and say this. She's still in hospital, but she is on the mend, and Rose's support has meant more to us than anything. For those of us who do have Christian faith, she couldn't be a better pastor and shepherd. For those who do not have such a faith, there could be no better ambassador, and Dover will gain immeasurably from her arrival as their suffragan bishop. And finally, perhaps, Mr. Speaker, enables me to wish you every success and your family every happiness for the future. It may not be so easy for me to see directly eye to eye with your successor. That may be more of a physical challenge for some of us. But I wish you well, and I hope all goes happily for you and your family for the future, because in the end of it, we ought to remember that the things that bring us here are more important, desire to serve our communities, than the things that may divide us on political grounds.
Well, the beauty of the Honourable Gentleman's tribute to the Reverend Rose, I think, will remain with colleagues for a long time to come. As to the matter of physical stature, the Honourable Gentleman and I, and the Right Honourable Gentleman Member for Rutland and Melton, share that characteristic of notable shortness in common. But I have always argued that we should at least be regarded as environmentally friendly on the grounds that we don't take up excessive space. Mr. Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's a pleasure to speak and join the tributes to the Reverend Rose. It can only be for a remarkable lady to have come from Montego Bay to the position of your chaplain, Mr. Speaker, and those of us who've heard something of her journey realise how how remarkable a journey it has been. I'm one of those who has regularly attended the morning communions followed by breakfast in your apartments, and the great beauty of that, one of the great beauties of that is that, as the Leader of the House was referring to earlier, the Book of Common Prayer, we have the service based on the Book of Common Prayer, which I have to say is vastly superior to all that has followed. And on those occasions we've heard a wide range of speakers from the community, and Rose has introduced us to many people who've shared with us the challenges of their ministry or their work, and it's been exceptionally valuable. One other thing that those occasions have brought is she has invited individual members to describe their own faith journey, and I found those particular sessions of particular value. But the other thing I wanted to place on record is the wider ministry that Rose. She came to my parish church in Grimsby, St Giles and St Matthews last year, and I learnt that that's something she had done for other members, visited their constituencies, or in my case the neighbouring constituency, and spoken and preached at their parish church. And it was a wonderful occasion, and one that I know that the whole congregation greatly appreciated. Rose, as we've heard from an earlier speaker, has varied the prayers that she says at the beginning of our daily sessions, and I think that has been particularly helpful and valuable. I'm sure it's caused a few ripples here and there because it's probably laid down in statute or something that the exact prayers that must be said, but I think it has been extremely valuable. She's not in the chamber at the moment, as heard, but when I popped out of the chamber a short while ago, she was there actually providing pastoral care and comfort to a member. So that just shows her devotion to her calling, and I think we would all want to place that on record. Mr. Speaker, if you'll indulge me for an extra minute or two just to say a few warm words about yourself. I think I recall we first met when I was the constituency agent in Gainsborough, and I drove you around on various visits. And one of those was when I was studying at Lincoln University, and you spoke to the politics group that I was a member of, and I can assure you that that went down particularly well. You also returned to Lincoln University 2 or 3 years ago and to give an address, and you spotted me in the audience and spoke very warmly about me as a constituency member. My wife said to me, "He's going a bit over the top, isn't he?" And I said, "What, John going over the top? No, never." But I greatly appreciated that. You've called me relatively early in the proceedings. One or two of us at this end of the chamber have, on odd occasions when we've been bobbing up and down, thought that your eyesight may be failing. But you've always been particularly courteous to me, and I'd like to place that on record, and thanks. But in particular, this occasion calls for our thanks to Rose. May God go with her.
Yes. Thank you. Mr. Dominic Grieve.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, for calling me, and I shall be very brief. Throughout the time that Rose has been the chaplain to the Commons, it has been abundantly clear that her pastoral skills have been outstanding. Those of us who've gone to the monthly communion in St Margaret's have come to value her fellowship and her company, and of course, in addition to that, we have also had the benefit of seeing her around the building and enjoying her pastoral support at times when some of us have needed it. Just as my honourable friend who's just spoken, I've had her visit my parish and preach during a time when we had no priest and an interregnum between priests. And I have to say, it was something of a star attraction, which showed just how extensive her reach had become in using her chaplaincy of the Commons to spread the gospel and the word that she wanted to put forward in her own way. So I will be very sorry at her departure. Delighted, absolutely delighted that the bishopric of Dover will be available to her, where I'm sure that her pastoral skills will be used to full measure. I wish to use this opportunity, both on behalf of myself but also my wife, who'd got to know her, to wish her farewell. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I just say this. She was, of course, your choice. Something which at the time I seem to remember attracted some controversy. And as we consider the end of your career here in the House and your period as Speaker, I would just like to repeat my thanks to you, because it's abundantly clear that if you have ruffled feathers, there are some feathers that you ruffled for some very good reasons. And 10 years on, those who look back will conclude that our proceedings and our life in this House was enhanced by many of the things which you did.
Very great. Right Honourable and Learned Gentleman, it's very kind of him, and I take it in that spirit. And as he knows, I wish him extremely well. Quite apart from his contributions in the House, the Right Honourable and Learned Gentleman is the most exemplary county colleague that anyone could want to have. He's been a brilliant colleague in Buckinghamshire for me over the last 22 years, and I salute him. Mr. Lawrence Robertson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and perhaps at the beginning of my short address you will allow me to thank you and congratulate you on your work. I think we've known each other in excess of a quarter of a century. You have indeed visited my constituency. You were very helpful to me when I was chairman of the Northern Ireland Affairs Select Committee. You've championed backbenchers, which I have a long record of being, and I'd like to thank you and wish you well for the future. You also very kindly allowed me to use your state rooms on the occasion of my wedding reception on the 7th of February 2015, and that mentioning that leads me seamlessly into thanking Rose for her work, because she did me the great honour of marrying my wife and me, Annie, on that date in the chapel downstairs, St Mary Undercroft, and what a wonderful day it was. No one who attended will ever forget it. It's something that still gives us strength and fills us with great affection when we look back. And I well remember I had to be interviewed separately, Annie had to be interviewed separately, then we had to be interviewed together before Rose recommended to the Dean of Westminster that we should be allowed to be married, and it was a wonderful occasion. That's my personal recollection. But of course it's also been wonderful to see Rose in action over the last 10 years. I've attended many services. I tend to go to the one at 1:45 in the chapel downstairs, which is immediately after Prime Minister's questions, and it is a welcome contrast from that experience to hear Rose tell us about Christianity, about peace, about love, and how important it is the way we treat each other. And I would hope that one of her many legacies as she goes will be for us to remember that it is very important how we treat each other. Personally, I will never say anything in this chamber in a tone or in words that I wouldn't say outside it to the person whom I'm talking about or to, and I would hope that we can perhaps try and all do that as we move forward. And I think the public really would like us to take on the lesson which Rose has taught us. It hardly seems credible that 25 years ago there was a terrible split of the Church of England about whether to actually ordain women. It seems incredible thinking back. And I was very much on the side of ordaining women, because I believe that the person who should get the job should be the one who is best qualified and best able to do that job, regardless of whether they're a man or a woman. And I'm glad the right side won in that debate, because we would have been deprived of the services of Rose if that debate had gone the wrong way. And many years on from that, when it came to the question of women bishops, of course it was hardly a debate at all, quite rightly. And that has enabled Rose to move on to be appointed as the Bishop of Dover. So I would like to just thank her for all the enormous work that she's done in this place, the messages which he's instilled into us about Christianity and about the beliefs and what it means to be Christian. And I'd like to wish her all the very best as she goes forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Richard Bacon.
Mr. Speaker, it's a great pleasure to take part in this brief debate and have the opportunity to offer my own tribute. May I start by offering one to you, Mr. Speaker, because I wasn't able to be here earlier. I remember well as a very young man running into the party conference in 1985 in order to hear you speak. So we must have known each other for at least 34 or 35 years. You were a very remarkable young man, and you've had a remarkable and in some ways famous and controversial speakership. But I think that of all the things that you have done, and someone mentioned earlier that you have undoubtedly ruffled some feathers, I personally think, Mr. Speaker, your best decision was to appoint Rose as your chaplain. Rose has served this House extraordinarily well, and she always seemed to have a knack of knowing what to say. In one of the most difficult times in my life personally, I happened to bump into her in New Palace Yard. And she looked at me from across the yard and pointed at me and said, "I need to see you." And although I had not talked to her about the difficulties I was facing at all, she already knew. She had a way of having her finger on the pulse and of knowing who needed help and counsel. And within an hour and a half or 2 hours, she had made time in her diary, and I was in her study where I spent probably 80 minutes. And I have to say, Mr. Speaker, it was the most reassuring and illuminating 80 minutes of all the time I spent talking to people about the difficulties that I was facing, and gave me an enormous amount of reassurance and relief. She has an extraordinary gift for pastoral care, and I shall always be extraordinarily grateful to her, because she set me on the course which I'm relieved I ended up on, and I felt reassured by her that it was an okay course to embark upon. So I think I would simply endorse the tributes that we've heard already and say only one more thing, because the Church of England often gets a lot of stick, and people often worry about the future of our established church. And my belief is that so long as there are people like Rose within it and rising within it, the future of our church will be secure as well.
Thank you. Luke Graham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate having the opportunity to be able to make a tribute to Rose. I, like many in this House, had experiences here that, when sometimes personal combined with professional, and I know many other colleagues in my intake experience similar, found ourselves having what would probably professionally be called a bit of a wobble. And the one thing I would say about Rose is she was there. Her office is one of duty, but I think everyone would agree that her performance goes far beyond that. She makes the time to see you, she gives you the opportunity to speak, and she listens far beyond the level to which her office would necessarily require. I think she has set an incredible example, a fantastic precedent for new members and for the future chaplain to follow. And I would say more broadly that her prayers that she puts forward in every session before we sit here in this place give us a real chance to reflect. And in this time of constantly being on our social media, our emails, our iPads, our phones, actually gives us one moment to step back in silence, listen to the words that are being said, and think about the principles that are laid out here that make this place and that make us who we are. And that is one of the greatest contributions she has made to this place. So both personally, both professionally, and both to all members, she's helped us strive to become the better part of ourselves while we're here. So I thank her on behalf of my other colleagues and myself and our families too.
Thank you. Yes, I will come to the point of order. Can I just put the motion first, on which I think no further speech is required, unless the leader particularly wants to do so. The question is as on the order paper. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. Yes, indeed. Point of order, Dawn Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wonder if you can just indulge me for a moment. I've got a bit of FOMO, fear of missing out, because as a front bencher, I've not been able to say thank you to you for everything that you've done in the House. Thank you for all that you've done around equality issues. Thank you for not shying away from talking about race issues. And I wanted to thank you for all that you've done on the LGBT plus issues, and thank you for making this House more inclusive. Thank you for opening the staterooms of your apartment so that all of these small organisations that thought that the Houses of Parliament didn't care about them could actually come to one of the grandest rooms in the palace and feel valued. So I just wanted to say thank you for all that you've done, Mr. Speaker, and I also wanted to thank you for bringing Reverend Rose into the House as well. Hearing everybody's testament into how she's touched all of our lives has been very, very moving, and she's touched my life in many ways. And my honourable friend from Walsall South spoke about Labritha Free, and I know that it's a song that Reverend Rose and I talk about often, and I just wanted to say the first verse of that, and it says, "The higher you build your barriers, the taller I become. The farther you take my rights away, the faster I will run. You can deny me, you can choose to turn your face away. It doesn't matter, because there's something inside so strong. I know that I can make it, though you do me wrong, so wrong. You thought that my pride was gone. Oh no, there's something inside so strong." Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for being so strong, and I want to thank Reverend Rose for all that she's done to the House, for me, and to everybody. Thank you.
Well, that was extraordinary and magnificent, and I thank the Honourable Lady for her excessively generous personal remarks as regards me, but what is much more important is what she said about Rose, and I want to underline and reinforce that. Colleagues, I'm extremely grateful to each and every one of you as we approach the end of this Parliament for sparing the time and making the commitment to share your experience of and demonstrate your, I was going to say respect for, devotion to the Reverend Rose, who has, after all, been devoted to us for 9 years. In every particular, and I say this not so much for colleagues but for those observing our proceedings, Rose has not just done the job, she has excelled beyond anything that we could reasonably have imagined or contemplated. Her daily commitment is there for all to see, day after day after day, combining her duties in the chamber with the responsibility for the conduct of services, the need to attend to St Mary at Hill in the city, and to interact with large numbers of people on the parliamentary estate. On big occasions, as so many colleagues have eloquently evidenced, Rose has found the words that needed to be expressed and has expressed them with feeling and with a transparent and undeniable sincerity. It is that authenticity about her which impresses everybody who hears or meets her. We all know, of course, that a very important part of Rose's role, as has been referred to by many colleagues in the course of these tributes, is the offer of pastoral care to members, to member staff, to the staff of the House, and anyone, even if not employed by but contracted to work for or having reason to be on the parliamentary estate who needs help. Rose has been there to provide that help. It has been a singular and unforgettable contribution. I certainly don't mind vouchsafing to the House that, as well as being aware in many, many cases of when and how and to what extent Rose helped
other colleagues, she's been a terrific source of support, succour and counsel to me. And until my dying day, I will appreciate that support, that succour, that counsel, that camaraderie that she's been able to provide. But many people have also referred to the circumstances of the terrorist attacks. And in those circumstances, we couldn't have wanted anyone for the purpose of providing comfort and mitigation of pain than Rose. So many people over the last 3 years have referred to our departed and beloved colleague, Jo Cox, and someone referred earlier to Birstall in Yorkshire, where the then Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition went the day after the appalling murder of Jo. Well, of course, I went as well. But what was really significant was how Rose went, and each of us, the Prime Minister, the Leader of the Opposition, and I, observed the impact of Rose's presence and her persona, her love, her kindness, her compassion, her empathy, on people who were experiencing quite unendurable pain. That pain couldn't be removed, but it could at least be mitigated, and it could be mitigated by no one better than by the Reverend Rose. I have a sense, my friends and colleagues, that we are all agreed in this chamber that the House of Commons loss is Canterbury and Dover's gain. Thank you. Colleagues, I think we come now to the motion relating to the adjournment of the House. The whip to move. Thank you. The question is as on the order paper. As minutes of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. We now come to motion number 4 on Northern Ireland. It says in the dossier, Minister to move. Yes. Indeed, an upgrade, as the Honourable Gentleman for Ruislip and Northwood observes from a sedentary position, not merely a minister, any minister, but the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, no less, Secretary Julian Smith.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. And I just wanted to add to my tribute to your speakership from yesterday with regard to the Education Centre. I didn't state during my comments yesterday all of the amazing feedback I've had from my constituents on that Education Centre, which you were so key to developing. Also, listening to the tributes paid to you, it seems to me that you will have limitless invites to the Kennington Tandoori, should you so wish, over the coming years. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the Northern Ireland Extension of Period for Executive Formation No. 2 regulations be approved. Having sought the House's approval for the NI Budget Bill yesterday, Mr. Speaker, I now seek the House's approval for this equally vital statutory instrument. I announced on 21st of October an extension of the period for executive formation to 13th of January 2020. That is the only extension permitted under the terms of the Northern Ireland Executive Formation Act 2019, and I have no discretion as to the length of the extension. I took the decision because despite relentless engagement over the summer with the political parties and with the Irish government, the political parties have not been able to reach that accommodation that we know they need to reach to form the Assembly and the Executive. I was disappointed to have to take this approach and to extend the period, but failing to extend the period and leaving it to expire at the end of 21st of October would have meant severely constraining the ability of the Northern Ireland Civil Service to make decisions in the absence of ministers. It would also have precipitated an Assembly election. That would not have been the right approach for Northern Ireland at this time. I am pleased that in the last week, the Northern Ireland political parties have indicated a willingness both within and outside this place to restore the institutions. There will be a short window after the general election and before the 13th of January deadline when talks should be convened. I hope both parties will engage seriously. As I have said in this House many times, the remaining issues are soluble if the will is there. These regulations ensure it is possible to undertake that swift work once a new administration is formed in December. I will remain in close contact with all political parties in Northern Ireland throughout the election period, and I am sure the whole House will join me in urging the parties, and particularly Sinn Féin and the DUP, to show leadership and to be ready to restore the institutions. Madam Deputy Speaker, I commend these regulations to the House.
The question is, as on the order paper, Shadow Secretary of State Tony Lloyd.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Secretary of State does know that it is inevitably with considerable regrets, I think, on all sides of this House, that we once again approach the need for this these regulations to be passed through the House. I think by the time we reach that January the 13th deadline, it will be something of the order of 1,100 days. If by that time there is no newly formed executive, no assembly in operation. I'm bound to say that I do hope that we can see the general election campaign conducted both in Great Britain, but even more importantly in Northern Ireland, with the kind of decorum that doesn't entrench people in antagonism to each other, that we come out more likely to reach agreement, yes, in this Parliament, but most certainly in Stormont. Elections can be healing. Elections, of course, can of themselves be divisive. But I don't plan to say an awful lot more at this stage, because I think the Secretary of State and I, the Minister of State, the Shadow Minister of State, have debated these issues now on a significant number of occasions, and the issues that arise. We can once again talk about the paucity of decision making that we know bedevils the situation in Northern Ireland, the things that simply aren't being done, have not been done, the problems that this causes. But this is a matter of record. It is important that there is continuity of executive function during these next weeks, and in particular that the Secretary of State doesn't find himself in the extraordinary position of having to call an election during that period. So the House, I don't think, has any ambitions to do anything other than to see these regulations passed. But I must, and I'm bound to finish on this note, that we are now at the end of the road for this particular process, that whatever follows in the new year inevitably has to be something, well, let me use these words, more creative, and the creativity may be the creation of an executive and an Northern Ireland Assembly that functions.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'll not delay the House much longer as well, but indeed it is with some regret that we reached this decision, but we understand exactly why the Secretary of State is bringing this forward. He has to bring it forward. It's logical to do that. And been brought to the Chamber today, and to extend the timescale. It is vital that the general election, which will be held on December the 12th, and the run-up to that is held, and that after that the discussions to find a way forward can then engage again after the election, but also sometime after the new year as well. At our party conference in Saturday past, Madam Deputy Speaker, our leader Arlene Foster put forward a number of suggestions that could lead to discussions being engaged again. They were constructive comments. They were meant to be constructive. They were positive from the point of view that we wish to find a way forward for the Northern Ireland Assembly to engage. And the leader has done that very, very well. We know at the debate we had in the Chamber last night about the budget, we all understand the issues for the budget in Northern Ireland. and why it's important that those decisions are really made by the Northern Ireland Assembly. I would be very, very pleased to report to this chamber that the Northern Ireland Assembly is back and running, and they will make all the decisions. I know one thing we're all agreed on. We all feel that's the way forward. I don't want to be entirely critical of other political parties, but I will say this. Our party, the Democratic Unionist Party, are willing and able and will be at Stormont on Monday morning, or whatever Monday morning there would be, to engage in the political process and move forward. I would encourage Sinn Féin to have the same understanding of how the process works. I think this election will perhaps maybe delay that. I think it's better that we do what we're doing, and then after that we can then move forward, hopefully with a constructive attitude. Certainly the DUP will be of that mind. We hope that Sinn Féin will be as well. Madam Deputy Speaker, thank you.
The question is, as on the order paper. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We now come to the motion on civil partnership. And before I invite the Minister to move the motion to approve these regulations, I should inform the House that the Joint Committee on Statutory Instruments considered them at its meeting yesterday and agreed to draw them to the attention of the House. The relevant extract from their report is available in the vote office. We now come to motion number 5 on civil partnership. Minister Victoria Atkins to move.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that the House considers the Civil Partnership Opposite-Sex Couples Regulations 2019, which were laid before this House on the 21st of October. In what has been an emotionally charged and very moving day in the Chamber, this SI is, I hope, a cause for celebration, as it allows opposite-sex couples in England and Wales to form civil partnerships. This government wants to see more people formalise their relationships in the way they want with the person they love. We know that there are over 3 million opposite-sex couples that cohabit but choose not to marry. These couples support 1 million children but do not have the security or legal protection that married couples or civil partners enjoy. That is why we announced last year that we would extend civil partnerships to opposite-sex couples, and why we supported the Civil Partnerships, Marriage and Deaths Registration, etc. Act 2019, which was taken so ably through Parliament by my honourable friend, the member for East Worthing and Shoreham. The regulations are obviously before the House. In short, Section 2 of the Act enables the Secretary of State, by regulations, to amend the eligibility criteria for civil partnerships to make other appropriate and consequential provision. The Act requires the regulations extending eligibility to come into force no later than the 31st of December 2019. These regulations have, as the Madam Deputy Speaker has said before Mr Speaker rejoined, these regulations have been expedited in their consideration of both Houses. I am extremely grateful to the Joint Committee on Statutory Instruments, who considered it yesterday. In particular, if I may say, the chairmanship of the Honourable Lady for Newport East was very helpful in understanding the urgency of the, this particular piece of statutory instrument, and so I'm grateful to the committee. If it helps, I will outline just very, very carefully, briefly, the concerns of the committee and the response of the government to those concerns. Our approach on conversion, that is, conversion from marriages to civil partnerships and vice versa, does maintain a difference between opposite and same-sex couples in terms of their ability to convert their civil partnerships into marriages. Importantly, these two groups are not in a directly comparable position. The right to convert a civil partnership to marriage was introduced to enable same-sex couples to marry without having to dissolve their civil partnership, as marriage had historically been denied to them. That same consideration does not apply to opposite-sex civil partners, who will always have been able to marry. Even if same-sex and opposite-sex couples can be compared, the government considers that maintaining the status quo in the short term is justified. Extending conversion rights to allow opposite-sex couples to convert their civil partnership to marriage now, while we are considering responses to the consultation, would risk creating uncertainty and confusion about future rights. We do not wish to introduce a new, potentially short-term conversion right that might subsequently be withdrawn in 2020. Once we've made civil partnerships available to opposite-sex couples, our priority will be to resolve our longer-term position on conversion rights for all civil partners and to bring forward further regulations as soon as possible next year. I hope this reassures honourable members that we have considered these issues very carefully and we consider the regulations to be compliant with the Human Rights Act 1998. I would like to pay tribute again to my honourable friend, the member for East Worthing and Shoreham, and to Baroness Hodgson of Abinger in the other place for their skill and tenacity in driving the Act through Parliament. I know that my honourable friend has been invited, indeed, to civil partnership ceremonies, which they hope to take place, the happy couple, on the 31st of December. And so our intention is to commence the regulations on the 2nd of December, which would enable the first opposite-sex civil partnership ceremonies to take place on the 31st of December, given the usual 28-day notice period. So I very much hope my honourable friend will be able to make those celebrations. I know how long some opposite-sex couples have waited for the opportunity to formalise their relationships and to enjoy the stability, rights and entitlements that other couples enjoy. This is the final legislative step in the process, and I look forward to the first opposite-sex civil partnerships being formed by the end of the year. And I hope, Mr. Speaker, you'll allow me a moment away from the important issue of civil partnerships to play my part in paying tribute to you today on your last day in that very, very special seat in the House. It is indeed an honour to be at the dispatch box today and, of course, to hear the wonderful tributes to your chaplain, Rose. May I thank you personally for your service as Speaker of this House over the last 10 years. As I was preparing for today's debate, I sat in our wonderful chamber that we have in the house, wonderful library that we have in the House of Commons, and above the ceiling, or round the ceiling of one of the rooms in the library, there are 30 wooden panels containing the names of every single speaker, dating from 1377 to your time as being sworn in 2009. Your impact on this place will be present not just on those wooden panels in the library, but also in the day-to-day business and interactions of this House. And sitting here in the chamber, hearing some of the tributes to you, which have ranged from the very personal and very serious to some more light-hearted and fond recollections, I will, if I may, just add one of my own, which is, I consider it one of the achievements of my parliamentary career. It may in fact be the only achievement of my parliamentary career, when I caused you to say, in the course of describing the name of my cat, for you to stand up and say, "I am as near to speechless as I have ever been." I take that to be some mark in my career. I thank you very, very, very much for everything you have done for this House, but also for me at the dispatch box and as a backbencher. And I wish you and your loved ones the very best for your future.
Well, just before I put the question, does the honourable gentleman wish to speak in the debate? He does. Just before I put the question, I do want to say, by way of response to the honourable lady, a big thank you. That was a very generous and gracious tribute by her. If I may return the compliment, and I think it's relevant to the whole question of the language of discourse, I would say that the honourable lady has perfected the art of disagreeing agreeably. She is a brilliant advocate of her case and a very highly respected and rising member of the government. In conducting debates in this chamber, it's obvious that she relishes the political argument, the analysis of policy, the competing claims, and so on. But engaging in debate, in engaging in debate, in my experience, and I've heard her many times at that dispatch box, she always plays the ball rather than the man or the woman. And that is to her enduring credit, and I reciprocate her very warm wishes. I wish her all the best. The question is as on the order paper. Dawn Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I welcome the introduction today, and I also congratulate the Honourable Member from East Worthing and Shoreham for the campaigning efforts around this issue. I also called for the law to be changed, so I am absolutely delighted that the government are finally bringing this legislation forward, which will put everybody on an equal footing. Last year, I did point out that the government should have already legislated to ensure that all couples have equality of choice. And at the time, I called for the government to take action to change the law so that people had access to civil partnerships. And I have no idea why it took this long, to be honest. And I have no idea why the Lib Dems and the Conservatives didn't want this to happen a lot sooner. It was over a year ago, 16 months in fact, since the Supreme Court ruled that restricting civil partnerships to same-sex couples was discriminatory. The judges ruled that current UK laws was incompatible with human rights laws on discriminations and the right to private and family life. So there was no reason for the delay. As the Minister said, there are 3.2 million cohabiting opposite couples. And this is, unfortunately, another example where the government has dragged its feet on equality. And maybe it's the changes of all the ministers and all the upheaval, but the dragging of equality really is unnecessary and quite costly. And the government seems to be letting a lot of people down when it comes to equality. And this only came about because of the brave steps taken by Rebecca Steinfeld and Charles Caden. And this was because in October 2014, the London couple tried to form a civil partnership at their local registry office in Chelsea Town Hall. But they were told that they couldn't because they were not same-sex. And they bravely took their case all the way to the Supreme Court. They shouldn't have had to do that. And, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to remind the House what Ms. Steinfeld said outside of the court. She said, "We are feeling elated, but at the same time, we are feeling frustrated. The government has wasted taxpayers' money in fighting what the judges have called a blatant inequality." So I would like, perhaps, if the Minister, when she stands to her feet, if she could just explain to the House how much this actually costs the taxpayers to take this to court. And as I'd said, Mr. Speaker, it was the Lib Dems and the Tory government that decided not to do anything at the time when they could have just changed this and we wouldn't have to go through all this. It will, though, the decision today, as I said, that I am pleased at the decision, it will give cohabiting opposite-sex couples the recognition that they deserve. It will provide stability and security and ultimately allow couples to decide what's right for them in their relationship. It will give stability to families and children. And I'm looking forward to the election, Mr. Speaker, because I hope that after the election, that we will be able to form a government and a standalone department for women and equalities and be able to push equality issues a lot faster and a lot quicker than we've currently seen over the last 10 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Tim Lawton.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I have a bit of a sense of déjà vu all over again on this bill, and it has been a long journey getting here, but this is a happy day that will lead to very many happy days for happy couples, now starting on the 31st of December. And I will be going out to buy a new hat in anticipation of those events shortly. But just before I just make some brief comments, and I have some specific questions to the Minister, just to take issue. It is a shame that the opposition front bench has taken a slightly churlish attitude.
Hear, hear.
And there was a very simple response to the Honourable Lady's question as to why this has taken so long. Very simply, because having promised me that they would vote for it, they voted against the amendment in the Same-Sex Marriage Act back in 2014 that would have achieved it several years ago. So she might look to her own side before she tries to cast aspersions on what has been a magnificent effort by the government to get here today.
Where are they? Will my honourable friend allow?
Perfectly allow it.
I pay tribute to my honourable friend, and I've been campaigning on this for many years. I was approached by two sisters at the time of the original passing of the Civil Partnership Act by Tony Blair in 2003. Sisters who'd lived together for many years and were faced being evicted and losing their home because they could not have a civil partnership. So perhaps my honourable friend can say a bit more about this particular case.
I would probably be stretching out of order, but I absolutely appreciate my honourable friend. This has been an issue he's taken up before I have, and it's a cause that I have some sympathy with, and there have been measures actually in the other place for a bill to go through on this. What I would say to him is this is about couples and relationships and recognition and protections that are not available. The matters to which he refers, which are particularly to siblings who are living together entirely dependent on each other, are largely financial ones, and I think it is legislation that should be addressed in financial legislation, and I would absolutely support him if that were to happen in the future. But that is a different matter to what we're discussing now. And I just want to pay tribute, because this might not have happened today, Mr. Speaker, and if this hasn't happened before the end of this Parliament, then the necessary regulations which we are now debating, which are part of the Civil Partnerships Act, which got royal assent back on March the 26th, would not have been completed in time for the first civil partnerships between opposite-sex couples to take place as promised before the end of this year. So I am very grateful to the Chief Whip and the usual channels, and to the Minister, and to the Statutory Instruments Committee that met hurriedly yesterday, and absolutely to the officials who have worked tirelessly in order to get us to where we are today, because otherwise the promises that we were giving those people who were looking forward to that happy day on the 31st of December might not have happened. And I know, and I've raised this before constantly, that many registrar offices around the country have been taking provisional bookings for the civil partnerships to take place, including from the very last day of this year. So there's a lot hinging on this, and I know a lot of people are watching these proceedings and will be watching for the news that comes out of this. Because the issue was that in order for those civil partnerships to take place by the end of this year, there has to be regulations laid and then a minimum 28 days. It's not really a cooling off period, but it's 28 days of registering your interest in a civil partnership before being able to conduct it. 28 clear days, which meant if these regulations had not been approved before the 2nd of December, those measures would not have gone through. And I'm very grateful to the government, because it was always a big thing for me that this should happen this year rather than yet further delay, and the Minister, true to her word, was able to persuade the forces that be to agree to that. So I am grateful to all those officials and ministers who've made this possible. And it's something of an honour that this will be the last debatable business in this Parliament, and your last debatable business that you're overseeing, Mr. Speaker. And I know you have been a big supporter, though you would never admit it and show any degree of partiality, but I know unofficially that you very much have been behind this as well, which has been of great help, and I think of comfort to people outside this House as well, who see this as an obvious equality measure that should have happened some time ago. So it has been expedited, but I just have a few brief questions, if I may, to the Minister. First of all, just to confirm, and I think she really has, the fact that we are debating this well before December the 2nd doesn't mean that the 28 days start from today, so that we need to expedite the purchase of hats before the end of November rather than the end of December. And I think she has confirmed that the earliest time the first civil partnership ceremony can take place will be the 31st of December 2019 for those who have registered their interest by December the 2nd, with the exception of emergency civil partnerships, which could, as happened with civil partnerships between same-sex couples back in 2014, could be approved in a matter of hours or days after December the 2nd. And I know there are people who have been part of the Equal Civil Partnerships campaign who have terminal illnesses, who are very much looking for this to be as soon as possible. And perhaps you just confirm that for the benefit of those for whom the date is particularly crucial. Could you also confirm the status of opposite-sex civil partnerships registered outside of England and Wales? For example, the Isle of Man, which was the first part of the British Isles to approve opposite-sex civil partnerships, and where key people involved in the campaign, for example, have undergone a civil partnership. Will their civil partnership be recognised in our law from December the 2nd or December the 31st, or will it still be contingent on further work on regulations that needs to take place? And I fully appreciate that this isn't the end of the story. This enables new opposite-sex couples to engage in a new civil partnership, and there is much further work still to be done on the conversion from those who are already married, in the same way as there was a conversion the other way around for civil partnerships for same-sex couples. And I appreciate looking through the regulations, which are very detailed and very technical, the work that's gone on to everything ranging from gender recognition to status of children to the warm home discount and digital switchover. All that legislation, extraordinarily, has to come into consideration for these regulations in order to get this right. So could she perhaps clarify the status of existing overseas or ex-England opposite-sex civil partners already in existence? And finally, will she also issue guidance as soon as possible to registrars around the country that effectively they should be open for business from December the 2nd, because there has been some confusion as to whether this would happen, and some registrars, I think the rather more far-sighted ones, have been taking provisional waiting lists as from the 31st of December, and others have said it's not happening, therefore don't call us, we'll call you after December the 31st. So I think it's really important that clear instructions are now issued, and if you could signal from the dispatch box as well, that will be helpful, because people need to prepare, and those people who've been waiting years and years and years for this day to happen, they want to be able to get on with it, and we need registrars to make sure that they know what they are doing in order to facilitate their request. And finally, this is just but one part of my Civil Partnerships, Marriages and Deaths Registration Act. There are three other parts to it. As I raised earlier with the Church Second Estates Commissioner about mothers' names on wedding certificates, marriage certificates, which is yet to be resolved by formal regulations. There's the issue about the Secretary of State giving the go-ahead for coroners to have the power to investigate stillbirths. And there's the fourth issue of the review of sub-24-week stillbirths as well. All important parts of my multifaceted act, which still require further regulations. I appreciate today we are purely dealing with the civil partnerships part of this, but again it would be helpful if the Minister would give some indication that work is ongoing on those other important parts of this act. But can I again thank her in particular for expediting these measures today, just in the nick of time, but for many hundreds of couples awaiting on this up and down the country, it's a really important and happy development.
Yes. Thank you. Minister Victoria Atkin.
Mr. Speaker, well, as always, my honourable friend asks me many questions. I sometimes think, in the hope of catching me out, I'm going to do my best to prove him wrong. The date on which regulations come into force is in Regulation 1(2) of the paragraph 2 of the regulations, and it will be very much in force on the 2nd of December, so that the 28 days notice can be in force for civil partnerships on the 31st of December, with the exception, as he rightly points out, of emergency applications. In terms of overseas civil partnerships, overseas relationships can be recognised as civil partnerships in England and Wales if they meet the conditions set out in the Act. Opposite-sex couples who formed a civil partnership on the Isle of Man will be recognised as civil partners in England and Wales on the day these regulations come into force, in other words, from the 2nd of December. I should say the regulations include a list of specified overseas relationships that will be treated as civil partnerships here, but other overseas relationships can also be recognised as civil partnerships if they meet general conditions. In terms of guidance, yes, the General Registry Office will issue clear guidance to local registration services about commencement of the new scheme. I don't have a date to hand, but when I discover such a date, I will write to him on that. I'm delighted on the last section, other matters in the bill, to confirm that the General Register Office is currently working on the secondary legislation, IT systems and administrative processes that are required to implement the marriage schedule system, and officials are working with the Church of England and the Church in Wales on the details of the proposals, and a timescale will be announced in due course. I am very keen that we help get mums' names onto marriage certificates as soon as possible. In relation to the other matters, I hope he'll forgive me. We've concentrated on civil partnerships, so I will have to write to him on those other two matters. He caught me out on those two. But thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Order. The question is as on the order paper. As many as have that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Just before we proceed to a number of motions, I have to notify the House, in accordance with the Royal Assent Act 1967, that Her Majesty has signified her royal assent to the following acts: Early Parliamentary General Election Act 2019, Northern Ireland Budget Act 2019. Order. We come now to a series of motions which I think we should take separately for reasons that will become obvious, and therefore I just want to say this. Before I invite a whip to move motion number 6, which is the first in the sequence, I must announce my decision on certification for the purposes of Standing Order number 83P, certification of instruments. On the basis of material put before me, I certify that, in my opinion, the instrument does not meet the criteria required for certification under that standing order. We come now to motion number 6 on income tax. Whip to move. Thank you. The question is as on the order papers. Members of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Motion 7 on representation of the people. The whip to move. I beg to move. Thank you. The question is as on the order paper. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Division. Clear the lobby. Elizabeth, everybody's in there. The two of you. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Oh, they're here. May as well go ahead. You've got the tellers. Yeah. Yeah. As on the order paper in respect of motion number 7, as many as have that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no.
No.
Tellers for the ayes, Michelle Donnellan and Nigel Huddleston.
rural villages that I represent recognise that there is little or no evidence to support the building of the bypass, and that the many thousands of extra homes that will be needed to be built to fund the bypass will further